Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. It is titled Ask a CEO, Building Cultures of Commitment. I'm Mark Raven, a senior advisor with KaiNexus, and I'm really thrilled and excited that my friend Mark Parrish is here. You'll learn more about Mark in a minute. We'll do the formal introductions and he'll share some of his backstory, but he is a managing partner and co-founder of the firm Parrish Partners. Today's webinar is presented and hosted by the team at KaiNexus, and we're really glad that everybody is here. If this is your first time attending one of our KaiNexus webinars, welcome. I'm not going to talk about our company and our technology too much, but I would invite you to visit our website at kainexus.com. We are a solution for organizations that are looking to capture, implement, measure, and share their lean and improvement works. So let me formally introduce our presenter today, Mark Parrish. Again, he's managing partner and co-founder of Parrish Partners, LLC, a Southern California-based leadership and management consulting firm. Previously, Mark was CEO, president, and director of Igloo Products Corp, a U.S.-based manufacturer of the iconic Igloo brand of commercial and consumer cooler and drinkware products. I bet we all have one of those somewhere in our closet or garage. I know I do. While in that role at Igloo, Mark was named the Houston Business Journal's 2017 Outstanding CEO. Before joining Igloo, Mark was president, CEO, and director of Stuart Dean Company, Inc., an 86-year-old private family-owned Manhattan-based international real estate restoration and preservation company. So Mark's contributions have yielded tremendous value creation with well-known consumer brands, including Harley-Davidson and Simmons, and other industry leaders and world-class manufacturers, companies known for rapid product innovation. Mark is a distinguished graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. And during his 10 years of uniformed service in Army aviation, Mark served in 5 countries on 3 continents. As an AH-64 Apache pilot and Army Top Gun, he served in Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm, where he was awarded the Bronze Star and Air Medal for Value. Mark, thank you. Thank you for your service. And he later earned 2 Masters of Science degrees in Engineering and Management from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a program now known as the Leaders for Global Operations program. So with that, Mark, thank you so much for being here, and I will turn things over to you. Thanks again.
Thank you, Mark. I'm very humbled and grateful for the opportunity. In fact, I'm excited. I had a chance to look at some of the preview of the Ask Your CEO questions. These are kind of those questions where sure wish I had a minute to bend my CEO's ear. Well, you've got a minute to do just that. I had the good fortune of being a chief executive in private equity, family office, my own entrepreneurial business, and now as a fractional chief executive. And I told Mark in preparation, I've got more scar than skin tissue, and I would hope that you might benefit from some of the insights. I'll share with you just ever so briefly so that you'll understand the perspective from whence I come. So I've done a pictorial diagram here of logos to share with you the backdrop that Mark just did. The reason I do this is to emphasize not the journey that I've been on, but rather the diverse perspective that I bring to the table is just like yours. It adds value because of your diversity, not only in the traditional race, creed, gender, nationality, but in all sorts of life experiences. And so I'm sharing with you those organizations that have helped frame my life lessons and maybe some insights I hope that will be shared today in ways that influence positively your life, your career. So I'm sharing this with you from a perspective of letting you know that this is my perspective. And anything that I share today, please feel free to criticize, feel free to provide feedback, but also I encourage you with discipline, put it into the framework of your life, your journey, your career. And you can see at a glance, West Point, the years of service abroad in other nations. I lived a few years in Europe, served in Southwest Asia, chose MIT by way of transition as an active duty captain, where I would meet my now wife and business partner, Michelle. So she too has a couple of master's degrees from MIT. Harley-Davidson, the motor company, would pick me up in its leadership development program and create a wonderful trajectory for assignments, both traditional and non-traditional, in the years ahead. MW Windows was Millworks Windows, Window and Doors, a regional. Simmons Mattress, today Simmons Serta. It was a wonderful company dedicated to better sleep through science. I would re-enter into the fenestration industry with DeCoonick North American, my first public CEO role, before taking over Stuart Dean, the family business that had clients for restoration, like St. Patrick's Cathedral. The Golden Gate Bridge was painted by Stuart Dean. The White House was painted. A lot of folks say, "What color, Mark?" Okay, I got it. The White House was painted by Stuart Dean. We restored the Statue of Liberty, and our first customer was the Empire State Building. Then, of course, there's the iconic Igloo. What a joy! For a while there, I was, as Michelle and I, we have a daughter. She liked to say, "Dad's the king of cool" at Igloo, so that was fun. And today, I share these lessons at the CEO and board level throughout the different sectors of public, private, and private equity as Parrish Partners, leadership and management consulting, with a band of 10 folks that are on board as part of our extended team. And so it's a pleasure to be here. That's my context. I've got about 10 more minutes to share with you 5 fundamental concepts on building commitment so that we can get into the Q&A. I'll maintain a pretty stiff pace, rigorous as we go through this, but it's really not to cram it down your throat. It is really to provide context for your questions and what answers may ensue. And so allow me to be looking at slides, looking at the camera, but also maintain a pretty steady cadence for the next 5 to 8 minutes. What I'd like to do is share with you what I've always embraced as my goal as the chief executive officer of any enterprise. The first part's not that significant in terms of sexy. It's not that sexy, I like to say. To build shareholder value, of course, the role of the chief executive is to build shareholder value and also, by extension, stakeholder values, which don't necessarily mean they're shareholders, but they influence the outcome and the results of the enterprise. It could be governance. It could be suppliers. It could be competitors, interestingly, from a strategic perspective. But my goal as chief executive officer wasn't necessarily to simply build shareholder value in the traditional sense, increase sales, reduce cost, increase earnings, value appreciation, but rather to do it in a non-traditional approach. What seems to be I'll suggest, the science behind the art. And that's the second caveat. By purposefully creating with discipline a culture that's worthy of each and every member's full commitment. And I emphasize that to actually build shareholder value, not in the traditional sense, but in the atypical sense of culture building, and to do it with discipline. Please keep in mind that from my perspective, discipline does not mean punishment. Discipline means the practice of that which is unnatural. It takes no discipline whatsoever to get up when you feel like it, but to get up at 4:30 for physical training, PT, in the Army every day, that takes discipline. It's just not natural. So the idea of discipline is the practice of that which is unnatural, is what we'll embrace today as we lay out principles for building with intentions a culture dedicated to commitment. And the caveat at the bottom, I need to emphasize, it is a joyful culture, one where you can't wait, where you don't need an alarm clock, where you get up in the morning and you can't wait to get to work. Or third shift, you get up at night like I once did, and you still can't wait to get to work. Joyful cultures yield peak performance. And the noble goal of creating a noteworthy cause, in other words, the noble goal of making a difference and the business goal of making a dollar, need not conflict. Indeed, they're complementary. The more you do in terms of well by others and the customers, the better off the company will do financially, no doubt about it. So I want to emphasize again, creating joy in the workplace actually leads to peak performance. And that noble goal of a joyful workplace need not be in conflict with the business goal of making a dollar. It doesn't necessarily take rocket science to say culture building, but to build a culture of joy that then yields greater performance for all the traditional metrics of finance, well, that's rocket science. And we're going to take that rocket apart today with 5 fundamental disciplines. Whenever I talk about a culture of commitment, and conceptually, there always is the antithesis. In this case, I present to you a culture of compliance. I use Gunny Ermey there as an example. Most of us know the now deceased drill sergeant from the Marines. So in a culture of compliance, typically even paraphrased or thought of stereotypically as the military, in cultures of compliance, There are policies, there are procedures. In fact, there are so many of them that the book could be thrown at you. I'll assure you that in every one of the roles that I've ever had in corporate America, I have violated policies and procedures. I may not have on my Z87 safety glasses. Maybe my metatarsal covers weren't in place for the day. There's some policy, some procedural. If you don't sit in a seat of authority, a seat of power, you find yourself in cultures of compliance, trying to understand the rules, knowing you're breaking one or more every single day. So what do? You're afraid. You have obligations, financial, personal. You've got a family counting on you, other folks that are near and dear that you've got obligations to fulfill. And the last thing you need is for an issue with your employment or career. So you're a bit afraid. And by virtue of that, politics prevail. Politics defined here as the abandonment of principle for position. It's the idea that I actually know I'm going to get caught someday. I'm scared to death to lose my job. So you know what? I'll find out whose coattail to ride, and I'll ride that tail as long as I can. Inevitably, a culture of compliance will lead to politics and the abandonment of principle. I'll assure you, give me a case study, I'll assure you that's where it's headed. On the opposite end of the continuum is the culture of commitment, which we'll speak today. The culture of commitment can be based upon disciplines, the practice of that which is unnatural. There are policies and procedures, but rather than being the Bible, they're mere guidelines and will never replace the values-based and principle-centered decisions that are being made to run the company. They're mere guidelines and will never replace the values embraced by the organization's norms and the principles articulated on a daily basis within those norms. Let's build a culture of commitment. It's a continuum because every organization, two or more, has a culture. And that culture can be lopsided one way or the other. Let's just together collectively say that with discipline, we can move the fulcrum to the left, we can tilt the teeter-totter to the right, and with every action, we take a positive action towards building commitment. For it is in a committed culture that you achieve the joy that leads to peak performance. Again, noble goal, business goal, not in conflict. There are 5 fundamental disciplines I will articulate that actually lead to disciplines, the practice of that which is unnatural, that lead to the building of a culture of commitment vis-a-vis compliance. The gift of trust, suspending judgment, developing dialogue instead of discussions, embracing empowerment as a cultural norm, and practicing principle-centered decision-making. So let's go through the first of these fundamental 5, the gift of trust. If I were to share with you again that joy leads to peak performance, what is the path to joy? I argue for today's purpose that the path to joy is trusting relationships. In almost any endeavor, it is trusting relationships, where relationships are defined by common goals and an interdependency. You need another person to achieve those goals. So relationships are defined by goals. In fact, I'll ask you, are there relationships that you're in today where you don't share a goal or don't need one another? And unless you have too much time, I would assert that there's relationships you may be in today that, based on this definition, serve no purpose. On the other hand, there may be folks you need to achieve a common goal, and you're not in relationship with them. And I would encourage you to broker those relationships for the benefit of all parties. Honesty in a relationship is when I tell you my truth. Trustworthiness is when you believe that what I've shared is my truth. And integrity exists when what I just said is true between both parties. Both parties represent their truth. Both parties believe that what they're hearing from the other is the truth. That's when there is integrity, the Latin root integra. Integer means whole number. Integra means wholeness, completeness. Indeed, the root of integrity is love. Love. And you'll hear conversations today about creating a culture of commitment, one based in love and not in fear. They're both 4-letter words, so be aware. So in the gift of trust, we look at the 2 extremes. One is the trust is earned, and this is typically conditioned by scar tissue and betrayals of past. I meet a new person and I say to them, you have to earn my trust. I got betrayed in my past, and therefore you must earn my trust. And I would offer to you how terribly unfair that is to the new relationship and its potential. And so if trusting relationships are the key to the joy and peak performance for the organization, and you're holding every new relationship hostage by the practices and principles of the relationships of betrayal of past, you're actually the constraint. You're the bottleneck on your own sense of joy in your life. It pertains to personal and professional relationships. And so for today, I'll argue that the number one discipline, the number one priority in building a culture of commitment is the gift of trust. It's the idea that you have my trust until you prove yourself unworthy. I will be transparent. I will share with you my innermost thoughts. And when you betray those thoughts, or when you demonstrate that I'm at risk in doing so, then I'll know what to trust you on and what not to trust you on. I may not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I'll know now what not to trust you on. But it was yours to lose, not mine to gain. It was yours to lose. And so number one principle in building a culture of commitment, and these are sequential, by the way, is to give trust until it's proven unworthy. The second discipline is to suspend judgment. We all suffer from the human condition. The human condition I'll define for today as a condition wherein we make people earn our trust. We believe we are to pass judgment with our sage insights. It is our belief that we have discussions where we beat into the opponent in conversation our position. It is where we believe in complete and unbridled freedoms, and it is where we'll play politics to prevent ourselves from failing our obligations. That's the human condition. We all suffer from it. Every single one of us has those 5 symptoms of the human condition, the ailment. The first is to change that to giving trust instead of making one earn it. The second is to suspend that judgment that you, through your sage experience, know that your job is to actually use your judgment, assess others, know where to put resources of time, manpower, and money. Well, the discipline, unnatural, is to suspend that judgment, knowing that the other individual has their core values, their fundamental belief structure, and their behaviors, and it's only in the behaviors that the values and beliefs show up. Your values, your core values, and your beliefs together are typically your subconscious decision-making criteria. I have values, I don't really think about them on a daily basis, but I make decisions based on my belief. Well, I too, like you, have my core values established from the age of 2 to 8, language to adolescence. And then from about the age of 5 until 14, I also begin to develop my belief structure. I actually begin to articulate thoughts. Well, I believe we ought to go left. Well, I believe we ought to do this or that. So that's the belief structure. So beliefs are the conscious decision-making principles. The values are your subconscious. And the principles refer to the collective of those. And they manifest themselves on a daily basis by your observable behaviors. Others are watching you. We are watching others. And so as a result, we judge others, as it says, warning, judge others using your values, beliefs, and behaviors. And they're judging you based on their values, beliefs, and behaviors. Often you'll find yourself not living up to their expectations, only to find out that if you compared notes, that 3 out of 5 times you share the exact same set of values, you have a different belief structure that should be, from a diverse perspective, embraced and explored. Well, the only way that you can do that, and recap, is to give trust, suspend your judgment, and use inquiry to develop dialogue. Developmental dialogue is the key to building trust and commitment within a relationship. And always keep in mind, you're judging other people by their actions, and we have a tendency to be gentle on ourselves. We judge ourselves by our own good intent. Moving on. The third of the 5 disciplines, developing dialogue. We talked about the etymology of integrity, and here I'll share again the etymology associated with an exercise where we took a piece of paper on my first day at MIT, divided it in half. We had a right-hand side where we articulated that which was said in a case study, myself and another in a meeting where I had an objective, and on the left-hand side, what it was that we thought when we said what we said. Also on the left-hand side, we wrote what we thought they were thinking when they said what they said. Then we acted out a play from the left-hand side, true dialogue, the idea of sharing our inner thoughts as opposed to what we believe are our positioned words. So when you see a right-handed conversation or a left-handed conversation reference, that's to the sheet of paper. The right-handed represents a discussion, not a dialogue. It's the idea of potentially using a style that's assertive or aggressive rather than assertive. Assertive, good; aggressive, bad. And so it might very well, in a discussion, embody corporate politics, the abandonment of principle for position, and your probability of success by definition on our exercise was 0%. It wasn't going to happen. The left-handed conversation embraced the practice of dialogue. It was a creative process of free-flowing exchanges. It was the idea that we had to exercise inner peace and silence. Inner peace and silence. I say here, can you make another dialogue skill? Word out of listen, and the word is silent. In order to truly be in dialogue, you must learn to be in silence, to listen, not to be practicing and rehearsing what you're going to retort. And so keep in mind, discussion, dikus means two people, beating, kus, percussion, concussion. Discussion is the idea of forcibly striking your position into another. Dialogue, dialogos, two people, locos, in motion, dancing, locomotive, commotion. It's the idea of being in action. And that's where the free-flowing set of ideas comes from. At this point in the human condition, we've addressed the gift of trust, suspending judgment of others, and entering into free-flowing dialogue rather than a discussion, not knowing necessarily where you're going to end, but just simply knowing you're committed to a journey with another and you have your starting point. And where we go from there is up to us together. Now let's talk about empowerment. Often at this point, I would ask folks, what does empowerment mean to them? It's not uncommon that someone would shout from the audience the word freedom. And I'll assure you that there is nothing more debilitating than absolute freedom. Given absolute freedom, I'm absolutely confident you wouldn't be here right now. Given absolute freedoms of choice with no other obligations, you might change your decisions. It's freedom with fences that's actually empowering. It's freedom with fences that's liberating. I'll give you an example as a Fort Hood case study. In 1985, I had 2 platoons. I was running both platoons. I told one platoon, we're going to run for 4 8-minute miles. And success is when all 28 of you cross the line. I stood in front of the other platoon and I told them, you men are going to run until I tell you to stop. Now ask yourself which platoon, the first or the latter, was more empowered, freedom with fences. I'll share with you the results of the two. The first platoon, we're going to run for 4 8-minute miles. Success, everyone crossed the line. In fact, if you look below at the results, 26 of the men waited at the finish line while one man carried the other. It was pretty powerful. They were empowered. The second platoon, run until I tell you to stop. Out of the 28, 11 men did not finish the run. Disempowered, looking out for themselves, pretending to call cadence. Empowerment requires fences and the ability to say no. And it's a vital part of building commitment in a relationship, boundaries. Finally, the fifth of the disciplines, the fundamental 5 summary, is the idea that there are politics. Politics, I've mentioned before, the abandonment of principle for position. I like the Ben Franklin quote. There's 3 ways of viewing corporate politics. They exist, and they exist. In the first case, you deny or don't even know that they exist. Well, that makes you a pawn in the chess game of corporate politics. Low power and off the game early. The second way of looking at them is in a zero-sum assumption. Scarcity rather than abundance, you proclaim, I know there's corporate politics and I'm going to play them. You'd be smart and wise if you did too. The third is to stop the process whenever the abandonment of an articulated principle occurs. Stop the process. Label that you've observed politics at play. Don't call the person a name and don't call them out in a fashion that's offensive, but rather allow for them to articulate and realize the principle violated, and then clearly inoculate your organization against the cancer that is politics. Do so requires that you suspend judgment and use dialogue in finding out something along the lines of this, the water cooler. Hey, in a meeting you said this, but out here at the water cooler you said that. I'm about to judge you and I want to suspend that judgment. What are you up to? Let's articulate what principle we agree to again and move out from that point forward, committed to one another. So in summary, I simply offer that to combat the human condition, which is perfectly natural and all of us would fall into it, we have to practice disciplines. The result of those disciplines, the practice of that which is unnatural, is commitment. And in a committed culture, it requires that you give trust, suspend judgment of others' actions, develop dialogue rather than have discussions, embrace empowerment, but recognize that requires fences to be articulated, and practice principle-centered decision-making, always addressing politics openly and without judgment. If you can embrace those 5 unnatural disciplines and you can build a culture that results in joy for people to show up, that'd be a joyful environment. Your performance will go through the roof, as it has with some of the companies and the accolades they've received. Simmons Mattress, Fortune 100 most admired companies, Igloo's performance, Harley Davidson's performance while I was there. Just examples of how true commitment yields joyful environments that turns into peak performance in an atypical fashion. This is not the course of nature. It takes discipline. Mark, I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark. And we're going to leave this slide up for a couple of minutes if you want to get Mark's email address and the Parrish Partners website, parrishpartners.com. Thank you for all of that, Mark. And we have questions that came in advance. And, it's funny, the questions come in without the benefit of having seen your presentation here. I think the questions were based on the title and some of the description, but I think a lot of these questions are still really relevant, and we'll frame them to what you presented. So, Mark, maybe the first question that Charles had submitted, and thank you for that, Charles. So you shared a fundamental 5, but Charles's question in advance was, what's the number 1 priority in building a culture of commitment? How would you answer that?
Well, I appreciate it greatly. I hope, Charles, that in articulating them in sequential order, that it would emphasize the priority of the gift of trust. Mm-hmm. It's giving away trust. I asked the audience, in a senior subordinate relationship, where power, organizational power, one of the 7 sources of power, organizational or hierarchical power, exists, who must demonstrate vulnerability first to build trust? Is it the senior or the subordinate? The person with power, organizational power, must first demonstrate vulnerability, hence the role of the chief executive. There was a time where the hero model of chief executive would prevail. And the old adage, the shall answer man, had all the answers to all the questions. Well, the sharpest of servant leaders today in the chief executive role, in my opinion, are the questioners in the Socratic method. They know what questions to ask. Not necessarily the answer to every technical question, but how to muster through leadership, teamwork, and communications the untapped potential in each and every associate. And from that perspective, the number 1 priority in building commitment is for the person in the position or seat of power to demonstrate a vulnerability. As I would in the military say, men, this is our mission. And the certainly implied and at times explicit, and I'm not certain exactly how to accomplish it, but I sure would like to tap into your experience. I'm responsible, I'm accountable, and we can get this done. But you'd likely know better than I. And so by virtue of me demonstrating vulnerability, by virtue of demonstrating a lack of complete knowledge of the situation, I was warmly embraced in a way that allowed for me to benefit with great insights I could never have had through experience. It's the gift of trust that is the highest priority.
Yeah. And just building off of one other thing you shared there, Mark, like when you use the word vulnerability, that makes me think of, kind of the modern practice of psychological safety. And that's something that we try to foster within KaiNexus. And I'll tell you, our CEO, Greg Jacobson, shares, vulnerable moments, including saying things like, I was wrong, I made a mistake, I don't know, like less of that definitive, all-knowing, power position, and in a more authentic
Yeah.
style of being and leadership. I'm curious, like, if you have kind of further reactions to maybe those examples of a CEO being vulnerable in those ways.
Sure. It's again, it's little dispute that I can share my military experiences. Um, my first leadership responsibility was with a group of seasoned veterans who'd been in for some 10, 15, 20, even 25 and 30 years. And I was a brand new lieutenant in the Army Aviation Branch. Far be it from me to think that I would walk into Army Aviation and bring with me the lessons learned in the most dedicated of fashion in the jungles of Vietnam, how to deploy a gunship in a combat scenario. So it was so obvious that I would not know the answers that it made it absolutely plain as day when I said I don't know the answer. It was pretty obvious to everyone that I shouldn't know the answer. I had to learn tactics and deployment there. It's not so obvious in a corporate setting. Mm-hmm. When people have interpretations of roles and responsibilities, and they're called to a meeting with a manager or a director, and they walk in thinking that that's that person's responsibility. Indeed, how many of you have sat in a meeting and said, well, don't ask me, you're supposed to have the answer.
Right.
It's quite common. And I'd ask you to check where you're coming from when you pass judgment on that individual. That individual might have received that role and that responsibility because they know how to get things done through others, not necessarily the technical skills of knowing how to get that thing done, but how to get things done through others. Their job is actually to educate, train, and inspire you to do your job. And so those moments where all of us are inclined to say, well, you're supposed to know the answer to that, I'd ask that we suspend that judgment and use inquiry.
Right. I'm going to build one other thought before we get back in the questions. And maybe, Mark, if you want to stop the screen share, we can go full screen, a little easier to engage with people that way. Before we get back in the questions, and Lauren submitted a question I'm going to come to next. But I'll tell you, Mark, you are the second CEO in a week that I've heard use the word love in a discussion of corporate leadership. I'll credit and reference Patty Poppy, who is the CEO of PG&E in your state of California. She's an industrial engineer who started a career at General Motors, right? Mm-hmm. So there's kind of, different turns her career has taken, but, she's talking, she talked about, she used the word love, and she acknowledged, hey, that sounds like a dangerous word to use, but I think she was talking more about your commitment to your employees. You used the word joy. She talked about the important mission and being able to celebrate success the way an athlete might. Mm-hmm. Why can't we exhibit that full range of human emotion in the workplace? Yeah. So could you elaborate on the use of that word love and kind of applications and using it in a way that doesn't get you sent to HR?
Yeah. So you can have the love of a way of being. I can love a way of being. And so when I refer to love of fellow man, it's the idea of the embracing of a way of being with fellow man. Mm-hmm. It's one that's based on integrity, strength of character, premises that we would consider to be natural premises, like the concept of fairness. Often, for example, I'll have someone argue from a perspective of fairness. That's not fair. Well, when you take apart treatments, I like to define, again, etymology means the world to me. True wisdom begins with getting the words right. So the concept of fair is treating everyone in the exact same situation, the exact same way. I challenge anyone to argue that. It would be fair to treat anyone, any two people, the exact same way if they're in the exact same situation. Now you have to ask yourself, who in this world is in the exact same situation as another? There's extenuation, mitigation, and other circumstances, which by principle must be articulated to deviate from fairness. What people are actually arguing for is equal treatment. And based on the definition I just shared, equal does not mean fair. Mm-hmm. In fact, treating someone equally could be very unfair, very unjust. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sharing that it's the way of being, to embrace the concept of fairness as I've just defined it, that would be a way of being in love with a way of being. Dedicated, love defined as being dedicated to a way of being with others. My first day on the job as a chief executive, I tell openly to every single employee, I openly say, up until this moment, I am not responsible for a single thing that occurred in this company, not one thing. But from this moment forward, I'm responsible for everything that
Right.
occurred in this company. So keep that in mind in our first introductions when you bring grievances of past and folklore of yore and to the language of our first meeting. Please keep in mind that wasn't me. And give me the chance. It's my way of saying, please suspend judgment on the role of CEO and give me a chance to make a difference in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So another question that's common. Mark, how long are you going to be here? You've been a chief executive officer multiple times. How long are you going to be with us?
Hey, short timer.
Hey, short timer. We're the weebies. We be here when you got here. We be here when you're gone. I've heard that exact term.
Yeah.
And so the question, Mark, how long are you here? My question to them in retort, how long are you going to be here? And there's silence inevitably. Yeah. And they sit there and stare, and I say, you're going to be here as long as it's good for you, your family, your career trajectory, your objectives. That's how long you'll stay. And that's exactly how long I'll stay. I'll stay just that long. And so keep in mind that as the chief executive, my job is to create an environment that provides for your health, your morale, your welfare, and a better culture for you to be all you can be so you don't want to go somewhere else. So I have a role to play in creating the environment that I want to stay in. Mm-hmm. But I'll be here as long as you're here. Yeah. That is, as long as it's good for me and my goals.
Sure.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah. So it's a question from Lauren. Do you feel these principles that you shared could also shift a culture of non-compliance where people are focused on their individual situation and issues, no shared goals, limited to no collaboration, into a culture of commitment? Is there anything that you would change for that situation? So instead of going from compliance to commitment, what if it's non-compliance as a starting point?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate it. We even talk about engagement at the cultural level. I think you've probably all seen the SHRM measurements that are published. 30% of the workforce is engaged. Of the remaining 70%, a surprising 30% is actively disengaged. Saboteurs, so to speak. People who actually show up and say, I'm going to buck the system. It's a surprising number. But there is that collection in the middle of folks that instead of being engaged, they're just disengaged. They're not actively disengaged, they're just disengaged. The same is true with culture. Please recognize that I presented it as a continuum with a theoretical placement of a fulcrum, with infinity at the end of both of those. There are cultures that are completely compliant. There are cultures that are less than completely compliant. There are cultures that are not about compliance, but they've still not tapped into the untapped potential of building cultures of commitment. Again, it's a step function. You just continue to move the fulcrum with the daily practice of that which is unnatural, these disciplines. The answer is no, I wouldn't change a single thing in the fundamental five. That's why I articulate them as fundamental. Nor would I change the order and sequence in which they're presented. Give trust, suspend judgment, use the power of inquiry and dialogue. Be empowering by providing fences and saying no. And finally, fight politics every step of the way with principle-centered decisions. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I could see where non-compliance could lead to a judgmental reaction. I'm not accusing Lauren of that by asking the question. But when you say, well, people aren't following the procedures, people aren't doing, they're not like blaming them instead of maybe looking at reasonable reasons why they may be working around elements of a broken system, for example.
Yeah, the Pareto practice still plays out in human conduct. I can't tell you in terms of people, process, and technologies, the three fundamentals that make up the assets of any enterprise, how many times it's concluded what that person is doing it or that person is the issue. And I reverse it. I really do. It's while 80% of the time someone gets blamed, I'd rather fix the problem than fix the blame. Mm-hmm. It's my belief fundamentally that it's 20% of personality or individual issue. It's 80% of the time a process, procedural, or technology issue. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it from that perspective, instead of just the thought of why can't they just go along to get along, or why can't they just comply? Well, there might, to your point, Mark, be something in the system well worth reviewing and looking at in the process and the technologies, not the people necessarily.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for the question. Here's another question is going to remain anonymous. It's a question says, my executive leadership team is saying they have, quote unquote, no time to put these principles into practice. What advice do you have to break through that and encourage the investment of time and the necessity of continually practicing these principles to master them?
It's fundamentally a wonderful, wonderful excuse often used. I tried to tap into it with the slide that had principles or principle-centered decision making. It's the idea that number one, when I present suspending judgment and using dialogue, it's the number one question I get from any audience, which is, Mark, I don't have time for that. Are you telling me every time I see somebody abandoning principle for position, every time politics creep up, or anytime I'm about to pass judgment, I'm supposed to stop? I don't have time for that. I'd be stopping all day long. Rest assured, you don't have time not to. I have to emphasize this. If you're dedicated to building commitment and therefore the long journey of joyful environments that lead to peak performance, you don't have time to miss. You can't make up for skipping that opportunity to intervene. At one of our customers, $45 billion enterprise, one of our Parrish Partners customers has a saying, see a problem, own it. See a problem, own it. And it sounds pretty simple, but when folks walk by an issue or challenge, oh, that's not my job. That's not my job. That's not my role. That's not my responsibility. I see something. No, you know what? You're held fully accountable for walking by it. You're absolutely a culprit. You're held fully. Did you see it? Yes, I did. You own it. See a problem, own it as a part of their discipline. And so the point here is, if you see a problem and challenges to principle, articulated norms and practices, you cannot afford to let it go. Insidious cancer will cost you far more time than the time that you complain about investing. You can't afford the time by skipping the opportunity.
Yeah.
If you're dedicated to commitment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. We're going to take a quick break, let you have a sip of water. I'm going to do a couple quick announcements here that we normally do at the end of these sessions, and we'll come back into another 15 minutes of Q&A or so. Our next webinar coming up October 17th. Registration is open and available now if you go to kinexus.com/webinars. The title is The Importance of Trust in Continuous Improvement, presented by Colleen Sapelsa. So I'm really looking forward to that. If you in between now and then you're hungry for more webinars, we have our webinars on demand library. It's more than 100 recorded webinars from the past 7 or 8 years. You can also find that at kinexus.com/webinars. A lot of great stuff there. Encourage you to check out our blog, blog.kinexus.com. There are a couple of articles there every week. I think, informative and inspiring. You can check those out, and you can register to have those sent to you via email. So again, blog.kinexus.com. And then the last communication channel I'm going to share with you here is our podcast. You can find that at kinexus.com/podcast. So you can find it in any of the major podcast platforms. The audio of today's session will be in that podcast feed. If you want to revisit Mark's presentation in a car or on a plane or on a walk, or if you want to share it with people that way, you can do so through the podcast. So I encourage you to check out the KaiNexus podcast. Okay. So thank you for those announcements. I assume you're ready and raring to go. Some more questions, Mark?
Please do.
All right. There's a question looking at the role of a CEO. How much of a CEO's job is focused on kind of internal company operations and people and products versus external factors such as understanding the economy and economic forecasts, looking at possible legislation that might affect your company or industry? Like, how do you balance sort of that inside-outside perspective?
It's fantastic and a really great question. This is not a cop-out when I say it's situational.
Yeah,
it depends. But truth be told, it really does depend on what? It depends on the era of evolution of any enterprise. So allow me, please. The eras of evolution of any enterprise include startup, turnaround, aggressive growth, realignment, and success sustaining. The STARS model. And so if you look at the eras of evolution from a defined perspective, you might recognize there's challenges that face any company that are different in each of those eras. Those challenges are different. Some of those challenges will require an internal focus. We'll call that an operational challenge. Some will require financial engineering, collapsing receivables and extending payables and managing the balance sheet with debt in the equity stack. And so maybe it's a financial situation. I have been in financial operational turnarounds where it's both, and you're internally focused. I've also been in companies that were preparing with sustained success or even aggressive growth for an initial public offering. And so by virtue of preparation for an IPO, the idea of actually focusing external or putting yourself on the market, a private equity portfolio company, where the CEO's role now turns to the roadshow as it's defined, the concept of actually putting together a pitch deck to sell your enterprise to strategic or financial investors. So it really depends on where your company is in its era of evolution. I will share with you that not every communication or leadership style is made equally, that some folks are built for turnarounds and others for success sustaining. But I will also share with you that in no matter what era of evolution that your enterprise is in, the fundamental 5 disciplines practiced in sequence apply, no matter where. Who thinks commitment is bad in a turnaround? Who thinks commitment is bad in success sustaining? Right. So the whole point is that what we've presented today in terms of culture building is consistent, but the way that a CEO spends his or her time really does shift situationally based on the era of evolution and the intended strategy of the enterprise. It could be 60, 30, 10. It could be 30, 30, 40, but never is it zero. It's never zero.
Sure.
You have to maintain as a chief executive responsibilities of execution and the outside, the inside, and with all the stakeholders, which include the shareholders.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. We have another question here from Richard. How do you balance between goals with KPIs and addressing the system or the process issues that are the drivers affecting the KPIs? He says most leadership focus on the outcomes more than the inputs, and they don't like to hear the results are coming.
Yeah, I love it.
How do you balance that?
I love it. Richard, I'm going to give a framework for this. I hope that you'll appreciate this. I once sat with a private equity sponsor, the owner of our company, and he leaned over to me. It was quite profane, honestly. He leaned over to me and he said, Parrish, I don't know how the heck you do what you do, but just keep doing it. And the point is that he really understood the end results. He did. He really didn't understand that finance, in my assessment, so heaven forbid, here I go with the financial community committing heresy. Finance is a third order language of commerce. At best, it's the third order language of commerce. It's typically, other than projections and pro formas, it's typically the results reported are looking in the rearview mirror. It's what's already occurred. It's not what's coming. And so by virtue of reporting financials, statement of cash flows, income statement, balance sheet, by reporting those financials, you're reporting what's already been. So at best, it's the third order language that everyone spends all their time on. It's like getting an MBA. Everyone spends all their time on 48% of the economy. The other 52 is private that no one talks about. Yeah. So I emphasize that it's finance that everyone focuses on, but that's a lagging indicator. The second is the KPIs that Richard mentioned. So the key performance indicators of an enterprise-wide effort are also reflections of what's closer to home in the enterprise. However, they're also lagging indicators. And therefore, second order language of commerce, the first order and the only leading indicator of that first order language is the key result areas. That is to say, metrics in place for people first, quality second, service third, and cost fourth. Again, the 4 key result areas. I challenge anyone to put their job description into any one of these 4 categories. Any task you do will fit people, quality, service, and cost. When you focus on people, they yield the highest quality, the best service levels at the lowest possible cost. Focus on people. When organizations get in trouble, they focus on cost and cost reductions. The first thing that they tend to focus on is people and headcount reduction.
Yeah.
It's so opposite of building a culture of commitment. It's ridiculous to think that you're going to cost cut your way into success. It's necessary, but the last place you want to go in building a culture of commitment leading to joy and peak performance for absolute turnaround is to cut people. It's the last place you go. You're damaging the very culture. So, Richard, to your point, it's the KRAs that drive in as a leading indicator. The human behavior is the only leading indicator of commercial results. And it's the key result areas of human conduct with metrics each: attendance, on time and complete, quality first yield rates. It's the key result areas of people, quality, service, cost that drive the KPIs that everyone speaks about as operational metrics that actually drive the financials, the third order language of commerce. You can't afford to not focus on the key result areas. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Richard. Another question from Jimmy. You mentioned MBA program. That was one of your two degrees at MIT. So Jimmy asked, you're a graduate of MIT and West Point. So through that lens, did you discover any lessons learned in pursuing a committed culture in the classroom versus groups being merely compliant to baseline rubrics and standards? So that's an interesting thought of compliance to commitment and education. So in short, how did you influence your MIT classmates as a participant leader?
Oh, how wonderful.
That's a great question.
That's a great question. So today I'm on a text string. I would offer to you that there are 11 people from my class of 40. There are 11 people, and I'm communicating with them today. Now, my heavens, that was 30 years ago. And today I'm in touch with them. And so if influence is just the idea of taking people, I like to say that leadership by definition, again, I really enjoy etymology. Leadership is taking people to a place they otherwise wouldn't go alone. And in my MIT class, I met just as many wonderful leaders as I did in my West Point class, a school dedicated to creating leaders. That is to say, these fine folks, one of whom I married, please keep in mind.
Yeah.
These fine folks were the sharpest folks I've ever been associated with, just remarkable human beings who took me to places I otherwise wouldn't go alone. That was quite intimidating, to be perfectly honest. To be an active duty Army captain who was working off of a mainframe to show up in 1993 on a campus where folks were working on this thing called a Macintosh. Wow. And I was using LexisNexis when people were using the bebop of AOL, just to give you some concepts. I definitely was the novice, the naive novice coming from a different perspective. They were generous and they shared. And I'd like to think that in some way I may have influenced, again, taken them to a place that they wouldn't have otherwise gone. But believe me, I say with the utmost of humility, they led me.
Thanks, Mark. And I'm going to put up contact info again. We have time for probably a couple questions more. So this question comes from me. As moderator, I guess I can invoke that privilege here. But I'm impressed when you and other CEOs, Mark, you talked about how you're responsible for everything that happens. The late Paul O'Neill, as CEO of Alcoa, articulated similar responsibilities as a leader. So being responsible for everything seems like, well, then that includes responsibility for not just culture, but let's say lean or operational excellence or whatever labels put on that. But a lot of leaders seem to either want to delegate or outsource that. I'm curious, either your reactions to that, or just to talk through a little bit more about the role of a CEO when it comes to operational excellence and the things that have to change.
I really appreciate that. So first of all, what are the two reasons for outsourcing? Again, for our purposes of dialogue, what are the two reasons for outsourcing? One is lack of competence, and the other is lack of capacity. Mm-hmm. So I may not have the competence to know what needs to be done. And so I outsource it. Someone brings a skill in that I need either temporarily or organizationally for the long run. So they come in and they patch a hole with a competency I don't have until I can develop it. And the second is I know exactly what needs to be done. I got 3 people doing it, but I need 4. I have a capacity issue. So I bring in someone from the outside. Those are the reasons. Otherwise, we favor the incumbent. We don't source innovation. Companies today do. Oh, but yes, we do outsource innovation. I don't criticize by brand anyone, but it's true that the biggest players in the Fortune 100 outsource their innovation until ideas are developed in such a way as that they acquire that company.
Mm-hmm.
Innovation through acquisition is today's strategy for most big players. Contrast that, if you will, with what I can speak on Harley-Davidson's innovation. The Willie G. Davidson Product Development Center, as an example of Harley-Davidson's innovation, is generated from within, and it is absolutely considered to be the precious lifeblood of its future. The idea of outsourcing innovation to someone is just not part of the culture. So it is a cultural norm as to where that innovation comes from. Regarding initiatives like Lean, or regarding initiatives of operational excellence or continuous improvement, Kaizen, however we wish to label it. While the leader, so it's important to recognize the three leadership attributes of technical skills, executable skills, and interpersonal skills. Technical skills is knowing what needs to be done. Executable skills are different. They're knowing how to get things done. And interpersonal skills are knowing how to get things done through others. There may have come a time as a supervisor on the factory floor where we're 60% technical, 30% executable, and 10% interpersonal. But as a chief executive, I'll argue, if properly designed, your role is 60% interpersonal, getting things done through others, and 30% executable. You have folks on the executive team who are executing. And so that's the whole key, is that you're counting on others. So 30% of your job is execution. 10% might be technical. I don't know how to implement Lean. I don't know how to do operations. It's not my job, but it is my job to be the spiritual leader, the cultural leader.
Mm-hmm.
I like to define roles and responsibilities, in particular on an executive team, with very simple and trite definitions. For example, sales. The role of sales is to gain commitment. The role of operations is to fulfill expectations. The role of finance is to keep the purse. The role of human resources is the keeper of the culture. But there's one person, one individual who has responsibility for all of that, and it starts with culture. And that's the chief cultural officer, typically called the CEO. Well, the CEO is the chief cultural officer. He may delegate the implementation of programs to the head of operations or to the head of human resources, CHRO, COO, et cetera. But one thing you cannot delegate is responsibility. Even in the uniformed services, Mark, you could delegate authority. It was actually called a letter of delegation of authority.
Mm-hmm.
I'm leaving for 2 weeks. The war chest is left to the following individual. They have authority.
Mm.
You cannot delegate responsibility.
Yeah.
So I may delegate the keeping of the culture to the head of human resources, but rest assured, not the responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I need to get behind initiatives like Lean and operations excellence in order to allow for those platforms to prevail in a culture where people are actually looking at me for the norm. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much, Mark, for doing the session here today. It's a unique opportunity to hear from an experienced CEO and to be able to ask questions. We were able to get to address the questions that came in live. For anyone who submitted questions in advance that we didn't get to, rest assured, I shared those with Mark, and I can tell how that kind of influenced the way he, talked through these subjects here today. So want to thank everyone for attending. If you want to learn more about Mark and his firm, you can go to parrishpartners.com, and we'd encourage you to also come to our website, kinexus.com. Mark, I'll give you an opportunity, for the last word here before we close.
I think I'll thank you, Mark, by the way, and for everyone who's stayed for the hour. Again, I'm super grateful for the idea of sharing principles and practices. I'd love to have the opportunity to continue the dialogue in any format that anyone would choose. So please do feel free to reach out to me directly at mark@parrishpartners.com. And I'll conclude with something that I learned in Special Forces training in 1987. And it sounds like this. Man can live 7 weeks without food, 7 days without water, 7 minutes without air, but not 1 second longer without hope. And I hope that today might provide for you folks who are either established in your career or looking for leadership to help you on your journey, that today would provide some sense of hope, that other than a culture of compliance, there might be a chance for you to embrace the ideal, even if it's on your team, of building a culture of commitment, which provides grander hope and greater joy and better performance than any alternative. I'll conclude with that, Mark.
Well,
Thanks.
thank you, Mark. Again, thanks everyone for attending. Take care.
Take care.